Welcome to the Inside Track on Real Estate with the Decker Team. I'm Ken Decker.
And I'm Yetta Decker.
And together we make the Decker Team.
And of course, with all our awesome specialists that are also on the team with us, we actually make the Decker Team a little bit larger than just the two of us. And you're going to get to meet some of them on upcoming shows. Whether you're watching us or listening to us, we both have this on video as well as audio. So choose your favorite medium, whether you're in the car or sitting by a computer or even by a computer where you can watch us.
So where could we watch it?
You could watch us at chri.ca or deckerteam.com. And Decker Team is always 2 Ks, no C in our world, so it's deckerteam.com.
And then if you want to send in a question to us, we'd love to answer it on air. And so all you have to do is send it to deckerteam@chri.ca, or you can call us directly with it at 613-860-4663, and we might even answer it right then, as well as put it on air later on for other people's education.
Yeah.
Yeah, so today we're going to talk about cottage property. It's that kind of weather now, and people are thinking, wow, it would be nice to be able to be at a cottage, maybe on the water, maybe a lake house. And what really is the difference between a cottage and a lake house?
Well, Ken, I think you're the expert in that one, so I'm going to let you handle that one.
Okay, well, cottages tend to be smaller, woody, a lot of wood. Maybe they're winterized, which means you can use them 4 seasons of the year. They might be 3 seasons so that they don't have heat through the winter. Maybe a wood stove or that type of thing, or maybe no heating source at all. So unless it's warm out, you're not there. They might have, a cottage may have outdoor plumbing. It may have indoor plumbing. Maybe hooked up to the lake for water. May have a well. Whereas a lake house is really a home, which is a 4-season home, was built to the same standards, construction standards, as a house would be built in the city or anywhere else. It just happens to be on the water.
Okay.
Or not on the water, beside the water.
Right.
If it was on the water, it'd be a boathouse. Or a houseboat.
Right. You're funny. So we'll also talk a little bit about seasonal properties today, not just necessarily cottage property locally. We'll also talk a little bit, Ken, won't we, about properties that are maybe in different locations than where you're living or close to home.
Well, we will now. Yes. So lots of things to consider when you're looking at a cottage. One of them is, how do you get to it? There are some cottages that are only accessible by boat. And we find that the value of those cottages is slightly lower than the value of a cottage where you can actually drive in. And now the road also has some important features, because some roads are private roads and they're not maintained by the township. They're not plowed. They're not graded. So you might have a cottage association of people that use that road that help maintain the road. But if it doesn't have access during the winter, it's tougher actually to get financing on it, because it's just a seasonal cottage as opposed to a year-round or something like a lake house.
Well, is that not also true for a property that is not built to current standards, even if you had easy year-round access? If it was more of a seasonal property by the sheer nature of how it was constructed, financing that is a little more challenging, or significantly more challenging than financing a property that was built to standards of regular house construction.
Absolutely. First of all, for your appraisal, but not only that, the banks like to have mortgages on properties that have a water source that's potable. Potable is a big word to say. It's drinkable. It doesn't have bacteria in it. So if you're going to take your water from the lake and you have a pump that pumps it up, you may need a chlorination system to chlorinate the water, which would kill any bacteria in it. Some cottages actually have drilled wells where they bore a hole through the Great Canadian Shield or through whatever rock is there to hit an aquifer of water, which then is pure and clear typically. There's also dug wells where they dig a hole, put a casing around, and the water filtrates in. That's not quite as desirable as a drilled well. So all
what
those
about a
things to consider.
sandpoint well? What would that be? Would you find that at a cottage property?
You might find it at a cottage property. You might even find it at some of the properties around Ottawa, if they're built on a sandy area, a sandpoint well is simply it's like a pointy spear that has a screen on it that keeps the sand out. The water can go in, and it's usually pounded in either with a backhoe or sledgehammer or something, and it's usually 10, 12 feet deep only. So you're really drinking groundwater that's filtered through the sand.
And now I find often those are still potable, though.
Quite often, yeah. The sand and the is a great filter. Think of your pool. That big tub that the water gets put through to clean it, it's actually being pressurized through a pile of sand, and the sand grabs all the particles and impurities. So.
Okay. So if a seasonal property could not get potable water, are you still going to get financing for that, or is that pretty much something where you need to get a chattel loan or actually have the money for it?
Well, that's a great question, and I think we're going to hold that question for our guest, because on our upcoming show we're going to have a guest, and she's Lynn Fraser, and she does mortgages, and I think that would be a great question for her, because I think different lenders have different criteria, and so it would be important to get an expert in that.
Perfect. So about waterfront, what about the actual waterfront? Because we're primarily right now on this little piece anyway, focusing on waterfront cottages or waterfront lake houses. Mm-hmm. So what are the things to concern ourselves with about whether or not the waterfront may be owned, or could it be leased, and what's the difference there, and why does it even matter?
Yeah, people are quite often surprised. They think when they buy a waterfront property that automatically the land goes right into the water and they own that. But that's not necessarily the case. Some waterways are considered roadways. As the boats travel on them, they're considered roadways. And there's actually a road allowance.
Or a boat allowance.
A boat allowance,
yeah.
You want to call it, yeah. Which takes up part of the shoreline on your property, and it allows people to walk along the shoreline without actually being on your property. Now, that's not a biggie, but what it does do is sometimes if you want to put a dock on, now you may have a problem getting a permit to build your dock because you have to attach it to property that you don't own. Then you got to get a permit. You might even have to rent that waterfront back from the Ministry of Transportation, or sometimes they'll sell it to you. So it's a matter of being educated and knowing what you're actually buying and not having a surprise after you move in and decide you want to do something.
Right, because we've certainly heard stories about people buying what they think is owned waterfront later to discover, or at closing to discover, that there's something else registered on the title.
Yes, so it's very important that you have someone that understands waterfront, understands country property, understands wells and septic systems. You know, we didn't talk about that. We talked about getting water, but when you get water, you got to get rid of water. And so, some cottages just have an outhouse, and that's fine. Other ones will have a holding tank, and a holding tank is similar to a septic system, except there's no way of, it's just a big tank, and there's no way of getting rid of the water through a filtering in the sand. So you have to have a pumper come in. We used to call them the honey truck, I think. And they would come and they would pump out all of your sewage, and that can be expensive over time depending on how much you're going to use water in your cottage. Some cottages don't even have a shower, so you bathe in the lake. So if you don't have a shower, you're not producing a lot of water, or you're not doing laundry there, you're not producing a lot of water to fill up a holding tank. So a holding tank may last you half a season or a whole season, and it's not so bad then. Or there may be a full septic system, and septic systems have to be kept away from the water, and they have to be kept away from your water source for your drinking. So there's a lot to consider, and don't highly recommend you to take a realtor that usually sells the city property and doesn't have experience with the things that are required for a country or a cottage property, and just say, well, it's a house, they should be able to help me. There's a lot of things that a realtor needs to know. Fortunately, we live in a country, and I lived on the water growing up all my life. And actually our Mantic Cottage is on the back channel of the Rideau, so we've got a lot of experience. The other thing that people don't really realize is that there's a thing called the Conservation Authority who look after the wildlife and the shores and the water systems. And before you can do anything on a waterfront property, you need to get authorization from that authority, especially if you're in the 100-year flood zone. Now, they might not know what a 100-year flood zone is. No. Do you know what a 100-year flood zone is?
I do know what a 100-year flood zone is. It is a line where when they flood the land, and in a lot of areas they've done that at different times, right? Different years?
Well, it floods based on amount of snow and water and frost in the ground. There's all kinds of variations. But what they map out in the last 100 years, the highest water mark, and that becomes the 100-year floodplain
And sometimes
zone.
they've even tested it and intentionally put some extra water in to sort of see what would happen in an area.
Really? That'd be exciting.
It would be, as long as you're not one of the people that lived there at the time.
Yeah, so there's actually homes that are built in the flood zone. Those homes are harder to get mortgaging on and harder to get insurance on. So we got to watch that as well. And you can't add soil or take soil away from the flood zone. So if you're removing some soil, you have to put the exact amount back in of the same quantity. And the reason they do that is if I build up my shoreline really high so that I'll never get flooded, I actually cause the water level to raise higher on other people's property. So that's why they have a very strong control on what you can do on the waterfront property.
Right.
So what about renting a cottage? We hear a lot about that now.
Yeah, and I think for the most part, if you own a cottage, it's very viable to rent it out, especially in the summer months. And then also if it's something that's for seasonal, even Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's, Easter, all the special occasions, even though that may not be typical cottage season, it's very lucrative to rent out your cottage. And in fact, we have several clients that have purchased cottage property for the intent of building some equity in a cottage property, using it the weeks that they're available in the summer, and then otherwise renting it out. And it's pretty much covering, and in some cases it is completely covering the cost of owning that cottage.
Wow, that's a great segue into our investor workshop, which is held on the second Thursday of every month. And all you have to do is call us, and call us at that 613-860-4663 number, and register to come to our investor seminar, because we talk about renting cottages, we talk about rental properties, commercial properties, out-of-town properties, all the ways that you can build wealth through real estate. And cottage property is one of those things. As a matter of fact, I'm looking into, well, more than looking into, I've purchased some land up in the Lac Ste. Marie area, because Lac Ste. Marie is a new developing area. What I like about it is there's a good-sized lake. It's 50 minutes to an hour, depending on how fast you drive.
And where you live.
From downtown Ottawa. And it's a beautiful drive. You drive around along the Gatineau River for a lot of the trip. It also has a ski resort right there, a ski hill. So if you have a cottage property or a lake house on one of those lakes or rivers in Lac Ste. Marie, not only can you rent it during the summer months, you can rent it spring and fall for golfing, because there's golf courses there, and you can rent it in the winter for folks that want to go up and ski for a week. So, and you might say, well, what's wrong with Mont Tremblant? Well, absolutely nothing, except it's fully developed. And Lac Ste. Marie is more in the dream stage, where it's going to be like a Mont Tremblant in the future. And so why not get in on the ground floor? And I've got contacts there, and I can help people design or purchase a waterfront or an interior lot in that area.
Sounds exciting.
It is exciting.
What about insuring a cottage property or a seasonal property? How do you go about doing that? How is that different than insuring a regular house?
Well, I would think there's different insurance companies have different policies on cottage property as well. A lot of companies will allow you to put it on your policy for your home as an auxiliary dwelling, and then your insurance isn't quite as expensive. The only thing is, if you have a claim on either one, it'll end up affecting both because you're in one policy. Okay, so that's the only negative around that, but it does save you some money to have multi-residential policy.
So with a regular house, you would typically have to be, or someone would have to look at that house. If you're gone for a week, technically it's 24 or 48 hours, depending on your policy, I believe, that someone has to go into your home. With a cottage property, obviously somebody's not going into the home off-season in particular that frequently. So there's variations to the policies. Do they work a little differently?
Yeah, again, it varies by insurance companies, and some insurance companies won't insure them at all, because sometimes they get broken into in the winter or whatever. You got all that kind of negative side of things. But most cottage properties are designed that you shut the water off when you're leaving. You drain the water in the winter, so that, because one of the big things that they're worrying about with vacant homes is a burst water pipe, because that can create thousands and thousands of dollars of damage while the water runs when no one's home.
Right.
To
Well, I've
notice
heard
it.
water is actually worse than fire
Yeah,
from a damage to the house.
Well, and that's why fire is bad. But then the fire department comes and puts water on your house, which makes you got both things. So that's why they usually bulldoze them. But it's a sad thing. But insurance is an important thing. And as a matter of fact, one of the clauses we put in all our offers now for purchasing of homes, condominiums, cottages, anything that we're buying, is that we put a condition in there for insurance. So we're recommending that our buyers actually go and talk to their insurance company, say, this is the property I've conditionally bought. What's my insurance going to cost me? Can I get insurance? Because there's some properties that you can't rebuild because of where they're built or whatever. So you can't really get fire insurance on them, because if they burn down, they won't allow you to rebuild. And then if that's the case, then someone doesn't want to mortgage it, because if it burns down, they got a mortgage paper that's now on a piece of land that you can't build anything on. So the mortgage company doesn't want that either. So there's a lot of things to be very, very careful of, and make sure your realtor is looking out for those things. You need someone to protect you in this process. It's interesting, because the big thing going on right now is, oh, sell it yourself. It's easy. There's no problems. Or mere posting, which means they just put it on the MLS, but they're not really using the service of a realtor. They're just advertising there. I liken that to going to your dentist because you need a root canal, and the dentist tells you it's $1,200 to get a root canal, and then you say, well, ooh, that's a lot of money. For $200, can I rent your drill and do it myself? Okay, that's what the MLS is. It's a tool in the realtor's toolbox, and we're there to protect people and keep them safe.
Right. And with cottage and seasonal property and septics and wells and all of that, there's even more to concern yourself with than a traditional house.
Absolutely.
Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. A lot more things. Now, some of the things that are interesting is fractionals. Have you ever heard of fractionals?
I have heard of fractionals.
Yes.
I know you like them a lot.
I like fractionals. I like fractionals for things that you don't use a lot. They're doing that with airplanes and yachts, where someone only buys a portion of it because they're only using it a portion of the time. Now, cottages are kind of like that. Now, there's a thing that came before fractionals, and that's called a timeshare.
Right, we own a few, and they've been moderately beneficial. They were beneficial in that they made us start taking holidays.
Yes.
And so they were good for that. From an investment perspective, they've not proven to be shrewd investments.
No, they're not a good investment. But they do cause you to travel. And the nice thing with a timeshare is you can travel from location to location. In other words, if you have a timeshare here on some resort in Ontario, you might be able to trade that week for a resort in Florida, or a resort in the Bahamas, or a resort in Hawaii, or whatever. And that's their advantage. The disadvantage is they have high maintenance fees typically, and you only have a certain number of weeks. So as your weeks deplete, so does the value of your timeshare. Right. And trying to sell a timeshare is a pretty tough thing. Now, fractional is a lot different, because a fractional, actually, you have title on the property, and usually they're 4 weeks or a month long. So you're getting 1/10 or 1/12 of the value of the property. And as that cottage property goes up in value over time, you can actually sell your 1/10 or your 1/12 ownership and sell it for more than what you paid for it, possibly.
So they actually increase in value.
Yeah, because you actually have title to the property.
Right.
Your name is on the title.
So it's real estate ownership. So it's really like shared real estate ownership.
Absolutely. And the beauty of it is that if you plan on using a cottage, say that up at our Lac Ste. Marie property, and you choose to, you want a week skiing and a week in golfing and a week maybe at Thanksgiving, and you want a week at in the summer for boating and fishing and that sort of thing, then you only need to own 1 month of the cottage. Why own it for the other 11 months that you're not going to be there?
Right.
And so they really work well with that type of a situation. Yeah. So if you just joined us, we're the Inside Track on real estate with the Decker team, and we're discussing cottage and seasonal properties, and we just have a few minutes left, I think. Mm-hmm. And so we welcome you to email us with your questions at deckerteam@chri.ca, or you can call us directly at 613-860-4663.
That's right.
Now, Yetta, you brought up an interesting thing, and that was remote properties. We're hearing a lot with the value in the U.S. going down. We certainly have contacts and information on properties in Florida, Arizona, places like that, Las Vegas, where you can buy a property for half, a third of what it was selling for eight years ago.
Now, the properties in a lot of these areas are starting to rebound a little bit. So some of them now aren't quite as low as they maybe would have been a year ago. Certain areas are still as low as they've been all along. So it's kind of interesting that the market always rebounds regardless of how much it's dropped. And so that is taking place in the U.S. right now.
In multiple markets.
In some markets.
Some markets never went down.
Right. Some markets were never affected. So if you have interest in any of those areas, we do have lots of realtors that we've spent years developing great relationships with that really get those communities. And we would love to introduce you to one of them. And they'll educate you on what's best in those marketplaces, just like we've talked about cottage property here. There's also all of that to do wherever you're buying property. There's so many details that may not be an issue here that is an issue there. So it's really important to have a specialist or a professional in the area that you're wanting to go to.
Mm-hmm. And with Keller Williams, the company we're associated with, there's actually over 70,000 realtors in the U.S. that we can draw from. So no matter where in the U.S. you're thinking of possibility of a retirement home or a rental property or anything like that, we've got the people, we've got the resources to help you, and we'd love to do that. The other thing, even realtors in our office now have been buying properties in, Orlando, for instance, near Walt Disney World, and they're buying a nice 3-bedroom bungalow with an in-ground pool and renting that to people who want to come to Walt Disney World for a week. And when you rent weekly, you do have some more maintenance, like you have to have someone come in and change bedding and clean it every week and that sort of thing. But your rental rate is significantly higher when you're renting for a week than if you're renting for a year at a time. So that's quite a lucrative business as well. And then, of course, you have to go down to check on your investment from time to time, and you might need to spend a week there and maybe paint something and enjoy the warm weather. We even have realtors in Keller Williams that they've decided they only work with Canadians. They don't want to sell to U.S. people because there is such a market of Canadians going down to the U.S. Our dollar's strong. The U.S. market is weak in many areas, and they're taking advantage of that. And there's actually realtors that have said, I only work with Canadians. And they're specialized in knowing what type of ownership, whether you should do a limited partnership or buy it in your own name, all kinds of things, that tax law, how to get mortgaging down there, because the mortgaging rules are different, and especially for someone coming out of country, it's tougher to get a mortgage. You need a higher percentage down payment. But they're certainly there to help you. we can give you some of the information when you come to our investor seminar on Thursday night.
Second Thursday of every month. And it is important that you register in advance, because we would love nothing. We wouldn't really like it to be that you show up and there's no one there, because no one's registered for the class and there's 20 people that want to hear what's going on. So ideally register, and that's simply by calling our office at 613-860-4663, or you can do that through the Decker Team website as well at deckerteam.com, and the email address would be info at deckerteam.com.
Yeah, and if you're listening to this on CHRI and you think, wow, there might have been other shows that we could have gotten information that we'd like to hear, they are archived on the chri.ca website, and we're also videotaping at the same time, so you get to see our smiley faces and listen to us on the deckerteam.com website.
That's right. So you get the choice of whether you want to see us or just hear us, and we're not offended either way. We're just thankful that you join us, that you hang out with us and learn about real estate, all the facets of it. And we really do love to hear your ideas, your suggestions. We've been getting great ones, which is where all the topics have come from so far for these shows, and we'll continue to receive all of that.
So once again, if you want to use our expertise to keep you safe, give us a call. We'll be happy to meet with you and consult with you. A no-charge consultation, 613-860-4663. That number again, 613-860-4663. We'd love to meet with you. All the best from the Decker team.
Have a great day.